My name is Elaine Wilson, and the topic that I've brought to you today for an hour of study is titled A Little Man with a Big Heart, because Toulouse-Lautrec was really that, a very little man with a very big heart. He was considered to be an artist, but if you notice on your Ask the Presenter request, if you want some recipes of his, because he also considered cooking to be an art, I have a cookbook. I can't loan it out to you. It went out of print in 1966, so it's not easy to get. However, I did copy out about 6 or 7 recipes for you. In fact, I copied out enough that if you're really a brave soul, you can make a whole menu with chicken and with potatoes and with mushrooms, and it even includes dessert. And yes, one of the recipes on that I did make, and I'm still alive. He didn't always use ingredient measurements because he thought people who didn't know how much to put in of salt or pepper or whatever it happened to be should not use his cookbook because they weren't good enough. We'll get to all of that in just a little bit, and we'll also get to one of the pictures because each time he did a menu, he did photographs or he did drawings that went with them. And one of the drawings is this one right here. And so when we get to that part, you'll recognize this again as one of the drawings that's in the cookbook. But it's fascinating to learn about his life and also to realize that this man was really quite a chef. This is Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. And you can see that his life was not very long. 36 or 37 years, depending upon who is doing the writing and how close he was to his birth date. But he was a short man who died, and I chose to use the age 36 because I think that's more approximate. He was short for a couple of reasons, and one of them was because his parents, who married each other, were first cousins. Their family history went clear back to Charlemagne, and each generation tried as hard as it could to have more money than the generation before, and so by intermarrying they were able to keep their estates in the same family. However, his father was, as many of the more affluent people were at that time, an avid hunter and a very active man in sports and a horseman. His mother on the other side was quiet and overly protective of him, and fortunately that was the case. The only other sibling he had was a little brother, and the brother didn't live very long. In fact, after the brother died, the father and mother's relationship really hit the wall, and the mother and father separate. She goes to Paris, where Toulouse-Lautrec will eventually go at the age of 8 to live with her, but prior to that he stays on at the family estate. When he was 13 and 14, these years are very important because they are the years that really critically impacted the rest of his life. He fell twice. He broke one femur and then he broke the other one. Some reports, if you look him up, some of the reports will say that he was moving towards his grandmother across the slippery floor in a hotel and fell and broke a femur. Other reports say he tripped in a rut in the road. Other reports say that he fell off a horse. The bottom line, what difference does it make? He broke both of his femurs and they never healed correctly. His torso will be the normal size, but his legs will be much shorter. They really don't grow after those accidents. The family genetic line also left him with a lot of times when he had severe toothaches, and he did have some facial deformities. You'll notice that for most of the photographs and the paintings you'll see of him, he's wearing a beard and a mustache because it covered up some of the deformities in his face. How tall was he? He was 4 feet 8 inches tall. That's about how tall he would be if he had grown to his natural height. Not a bad-looking man and well-proportioned. But this is how tall he ended up being. This is the family home in Albi in France. This would have been where he was born. And there's a restaurant nearby. Now, I went by this house when I was in Albi last fall. Albi is a beautiful town, and it's a river winds through it, and it's all of the terracotta roofs, and it's just a gorgeous medieval-like town. And down the street, if you walk down here past the house, it doesn't look like much, but remember palaces didn't all have turrets on them, and great big huge walls around them. This house is rather extensive, and it goes down behind this street that comes up here. Around the corner from that is this restaurant, what happened to be the carriage house for the Toulouse-Lautrec family. And over the years, it was converted into a wonderful restaurant. And yes, I ate there. You know how I love to go places where artists have been. And the food is just scrumptious. If you get to Albi, I highly recommend you go to this restaurant. This is a little guy when he lived here. Normal size, growing up, no idea that by the time he's 13 that he will suffer a serious fall that would debilitate him for the rest of his life. Here's a self-portrait that he did. Because of his lack of mobility, he ends up turning to art, which his father thinks is a good thing for a gentleman to know about, but didn't really like the idea that he ended up making his whole career as an artist. He thought that was a little debasing for the family name. However, this is one of the early paintings that Lautrec does of himself. He was very self-conscious about his appearance all of his life. These are 3 sketches that he did of himself, and you notice he doesn't see himself as an attractive man at all, and you'll notice how he thinks he has very thick lips. And here he's showing the beard. There's the start of it. There's something else that's common to all of these images, and it's the cane. He will need to use a cane all of his life, and I will speak about the cane, specifically about this cane, the cane later in this program. When he oil painted, a lot of times he would thin the oil paint with linseed oil and with turpentine. And then a lot of times he painted on cardboard, which is the surface that this was painted on. The cardboard absorbs the color and the turpentine or the oil quickly, and so the paintings will dry faster. They have a smoother look to them than they would otherwise if he had used the oil directly from the tubes with just a little bit of a vehicle. Here's some other paintings that he did. He kind of looks like he was a part of, and he was a part of the Impressionist period. Look at this piece. If you remember back to looking at the work done by Renoir or Manet or Degas, and you look at these horses that are in here, and look at this wonderful piece called The White Horse. His first instructor, he ended up having 3. His first instructor was deaf and mute from an early age. But he was a very avid horseman, and he was very interested in teaching his students how to draw animals. So Henri will be with him when they go to the circus and when they go to the racetracks, and he will do many sketches. He does a lot of his painting in his studio, just as Manet had done or Degas. But he would do a lot of on-site sketching as well. And in some cases, these would have been the sketches that he would have done while he was sitting there watching the circus. Very, very, very fine draftsman. There's a puppy Remember Rockwell. Remember the puppies. I bet you didn't notice that till I pointed it out. He added it there. He evidently got the memo that putting a puppy in a picture was not a bad idea because the dog is racing ahead of the horses. Here are two other pieces that he did. He will make, Toulouse-Lautrec will make poster and art form. Up until this time, if you wanted to announce something, you just wrote it on a piece of paper and tacked it someplace. Look what he does. Now, this is not his first poster, but this is one that he did for an artist friend, an author friend of his named Victor. And when he did this, he was advertising Victor's book for him because Victor was having a signing and he wanted to make sure people knew that they should come and they should buy a book and he would sign it. Other artists, as I have pointed out previously, would do the same subject over and over again. Lautrec is no different. He will do the same thing. Notice the line work in this one and notice the color in this one. Notice how this has more of an impressionist look to it, but also admire his ability to use line and use it so exactly. There's not a lot of sketching. He could very, very easily record with just one sweep of a pencil or a pen exactly what he wanted to see, you to see. This is one that he did at the circus. Now this one is more involved. This would have been one that he would have done back in his studio. I want to make a point here about this man because I won't be doing it again as we move along, but I do want you to be aware of the fact that very, very often Lautrec will not show all of the legs on men. Why? Because of his own self-conscious state. So here, this man, now back here we have somebody who looks like it could be a clown, but he will avoid showing the legs, especially on men, not women, but on men more often than not because of his own personal sadness. He had girlfriends. This is one that you heard about when I did the program on Renoir. Her name is Suzanne Valadin. Now, Suzanne became his lover for 2 years. This is a painting that he did of her, done on cardboard. So it almost looks like it's watercolor and it's sketchy. And he would work with different mediums. It wasn't that he had to use only, he didn't make a lot of rules for himself. So he could float color in here and then go back in with pastels and add the lines that he wanted to add. If you remember her, then you remember this piece because this is one of two that Renoir did of his dance series. And remember, there were 3 of these, and the one in the middle was the one that Renoir did of his wife, Elaine. But here you see Suzanne again. This is done before the one by Toulouse-Lautrec. Suzanne will lead an interesting life, and what is curious about her is she's a very bright young woman. She's also very aggressive and, well, you'll see. She can get herself into some trouble once in a while, but she was very much in tune with what was going on in the studio while they were painting her. And she would ask a lot of questions and she would check what they were doing. So they actually, without even trying, trained her to become a good artist. She will live to be 72. She doesn't die until 1938. From the very start, when the mother realized that Henri was not going to be able to live a normal life of a nobleman, she dreamed of him becoming a very fashionable, very famous, respected painter. Well, it didn't actually turn out to be the dream that she had hoped. Part of it turned out, especially towards the end, to be more of a nightmare for her. But he does become famous. And he does associate with many people, many different levels, because he had many, many, many friends. And he certainly is respected as a painter. He was respected when he was alive. He is more respected than that now. This is Suzanne again. They had some wild times. This is a painting. Looks like a sketch, doesn't it? But he's just added the color. Almost looks like a little bit like Van Gogh, with all the little lines here and there. But there's Suzanne trying to recover the morning after the night before. There is Suzanne at 44, and she's working on a painting in her own home. Just so you have some idea as to what kind of painting she did. And I will say this about this woman. Her work should not be taken lightly by you. The Metropolitan Museum of Art has some of her paintings. There are museums around the world that carry work done by Suzanne Valadon. But she was a wild creature. And one time, I say here, she slid down a banister at a club wearing only a mask. Yes, folks, nothing else. No shoes, no stockings, no hairpiece, only a mask. Down the banister. Did create quite of an entrance for herself. So she was not beyond doing some unusual things, but she also was not beyond creating some very fine examples of art. She will have a son whose name is Maurice Utrio. I don't know when or if I'll get to him in my series, but Utrio will become a very, very important French artist. And the man who was the first one to buy her sketches was Edgar Degas. Remember, he had lots of money. He could afford to help out artists, and he saw the quality of her work. So he was a good friend of hers, and he was a good friend of hers to the very end. This little sweetie is named Carmen. Carmen was a laundress, and Carmen became a very good friend of Toulouse-Lautrec's. She was kind, she was sensitive, she was sweet, and she encouraged him with his paintings. She would look at them and study them, and they would discuss them. And this is a painting that he did of her. This is another one that he did of her. And notice the red hair. More often than not, you'll find that when he can, he picks a model with red hair. He loved to paint red hair. And Carmen in this painting over here is sitting in his studio. And if you look in the background, behind her, you can see a conglomeration of things, and there are papers back here, and there's something sitting on a shelf over here. As I've said to you before, look into the painting. There's more going on than just what you see in the foreground. And who influenced him? Degas. Degas influenced him. Remember, he did many paintings of laundresses. And look at the similarity between this and this. He was a good friend of Vincent van Gogh's. This is a portrait that he did of Vincent in 1888. Vincent was 11 years older than Henri, and so at the time that this was done, Vincent was 34, and he doesn't live very much longer. But this was done when he was taking art lessons in Marmont. He and Lautrec were both in the same classes, and he was also at that time living with Theo. This was right before he left for Arles, when he met Gauguin. Isn't it wonderful when you know about all these artists, and then I can just mention their name, and you know something about what was going on. Vincent and Theo met Gauguin, bought one of his paintings. Gauguin talked to them about Tahiti and how wonderful it was, and Vincent heads off to Arles. By the time that Vincent heads off to Arles, he is getting close to being a severe alcoholic. if you notice in this particular painting of him, there's a glass. This would have been the glass that he would have just emptied. This is considered by many to be perhaps the most emotionally charged photograph, or a portrait rather, of Vincent that was ever done. And this one, this wasn't done with paint. This was done with pastels. But Vincent has a very intense look. It's a very good likeness of his profile. It's just a very fine piece of work. And yes, Henri will learn of Vincent's unfortunate death, and he will be one of the 10 people who will attend his funeral in Anvers. Vincent was very interested in the clubs and the cafes and the people who went to them and performed in them. And one of them was this woman named La Goulou. Her name actually was Louise Weber, and she was called the Glutton. She was called the Glutton. Here she is, back in here. She was called the Glutton because as she danced around the Moulin Rouge, she would stop and she would pick up a drink off of a customer's table and just down it, and then keep right on dancing, and then down another one. And it didn't seem to affect her stomach much because she downed whatever was there. It could be a liquor, could have been beer, could have been wine, but they called her Goulou. She invented the can-can. You know, everything starts with somebody. Everything starts with one person. Edison designed, finally, the best incandescent light bulb. Louise invents the can-can. She has painted, or she has embroidered, a heart on her pantaloons. You can't see it on this picture, but she had pantaloons with a heart on. And the fun for the men was to have her flip up her skirt enough that they could see the heart on her pantaloons. Toulouse-Lautrec will do this poster, which is his first one. He will do over 30, at least, during the 10 years of his active artistic life until his death. But this is the first one that he did. And the Moulin Rouge was thrilled to death about this because it just brought in all kinds of people. This wasn't that small. Remember, Toulouse-Lautrec is 4 feet 8 inches. He made this poster 6 feet tall. So this poster was a good-sized piece of publicity that could be attached to different places around the Montmartre area, and it just drew in crowds and crowds of people. The owner was so thrilled about all of this that one of the things that he did for Lautrec was to give him his own table. It was reserved for him no matter when he showed up. He could order what he wanted, he could drink what he wanted, or eat what he wanted, but he was a welcome guest at the Moulin Rouge. I boxed this man because I want to talk about him again. His position of his hands, in fact his whole body, is a little odd. So let me explain to you a little bit about who he is. We'll start with this painting first, or this photograph first, and this shows Lautrec in his studio. Lautrec's studio was not always that neat, but it was certainly a working site for him. And I can only imagine that his friend, the laundress, might have sat on this chair right here when he painted her in that lovely picture that he did for her that was beside the one of the laundress. Notice something else in this piece. Look at this little bed. He doesn't have long legs. He couldn't climb up into a regular sized bed. This bed is practically on the floor. But this might have been just a day bed. However, it was certainly functional for him. This is the painting he was working on in the photograph that you just saw. If you notice this piece, there are a lot of people in this painting, and I'll mention this again just to make sure that you remember it. Whenever he did crowds of people, he made them look different. Each person is different. He had a wonderful ability to do that. Here is La Gulu, and she is dancing with Valentine the Boneless. That's the man you saw boxed in the last slide. Valentine the Boneless was double jointed. He was by day a very successful wine merchant, and by night he was a very actively engaged dancer at the Moulin Rouge. And his favorite partner was Gulu. Notice this couple. Obviously, she doesn't really want to be there, but she's following him nevertheless, not with a great deal of delight. But nevertheless, she's there and she'll just have to make the best of it, she has decided. Here is La Guru arriving at the Moulin Rouge. Lautrec will do a number of different women and studies of them at different stages, and you'll see a few more as we move along here. But she's drunk. She's already drunk, and she's going to be dancing. She's being held up or hanging on to these two women on either side of her to get her in there. Hopefully she'll sober up enough when she's dancing and moving around that she can manage herself. She had spent a lot of time dancing when she was even a teenager. Her mother was a laundress, and she would go down and visit with her mother during the day, and she'd spot clothing that looked kind of neat and might fit her, and then she'd sneak back to the laundry at night and she'd put on some of those newly washed and clean clothes, and then she would just wear them. She'd go out and dance and then bring them back and put them in the dirty clothes pile, and whoever was doing the laundry never seemed to be the wiser. But she'd borrowed laundered clothes for a long time when she was a teenager, because they was from a very poor family. This is where I said she flipped off. She not only drank from their glasses, but she could kick so high that with the toe of her shoe she could flip off a man's top hat. They just loved to see her do that. And at the Moulin Rouge, which was a center of nightlife at that time, she was the highest paid entertainer in Paris. So she had a very fine lifestyle at that point. And this is her as a younger girl. Now, folks, take a look at this. That's her older. She falls into hard times. She left the Moulin Rouge in 1895 because she was talked into investing in a traveling circus show. And so she went along with this and was financing it, and it went down the tubes. And it certainly was definitely the worst decision she could have made for herself and her life. She ends up living in a circus wagon, which is what's behind her. There's no comparison between these two people. She lived to be 62 years old, and this is her obituary. This is, she has died. This is what she was called. There's Gulu written right there. At the very end of her life, she would sit outside the Moulin Rouge with peanuts and matches, and she would sell those to customers who might be in need. And she would sometimes say to them, "I'm La Guru, I'm Gulu, I'm Gulu." Well, people just thought she was crazy. They never really connected this woman with this lovely young woman that you see over here. Yvette Galbert does a lot better. Yvette Galbert as a dancer, look at the wasp lace on her. Really, really, really thin. Very tall, very stately. This is a piece that Lautrec did of her. She performed at the Ambassadors, and this is one of the pieces of signage that was done. You can see the orchestra, you can see the audience. There's another piece that he did of her, which is a quick pastel drawing. There are some other pieces. Now I want you to look closely at 3 of these. This one, and this one, and this one. Doesn't quite look as glamorous as she does here and here. If she had insulted Lautrec, he would wait until it was time for her performance, and then he would intentionally saunter down, with his cane of course, he would saunter down the aisle to a front row seat with his sketch pad and his tablet, or his sketching equipment, and he would sketch her. And she knew when he was doing that, he was making her look ugly. He did that intentionally to get even with her for having done something to him that upset him. One time she even stopped her performance and she yelled out into the audience, "Get him out of here, get him out of here. He is insulting me, he is disturbing me." And of course nobody knew what he was talking about, but he just loved to do that to her. Notice something else. In all of these pictures, she's wearing black gloves. That was kind of her statement. And she also had an interesting way of performing. She just stood still. She had long arms. You can tell that. She had long arms and she just moved her arms around, but she did not move her body much. However, some of her songs were rather risque and gaudy and brawdy and sort of colorful. I'll show you a picture of a man who composed a lot of the pieces that she sang in just a little bit. But she made quite a career for herself. She married quite well, and you'll find this interesting. She even performed at Carnegie Hall in New York City. So this is not a woman who did not have talent, but this is a woman that she insulted Toulouse-Lautrec. He could certainly make her look anything less than what she was. And look, she really was a rather attractive young woman. You saw this picture when I held up the cookbook. And here's another one of his posters that he did. Now, notice with this poster, and with that, the piece called The Box with the Gilded Mask, and the gilded mask is here. His sense of composition. He moves you into the piece. Remember, the Impressionist artists were interested in diagonal lines, and they were interested in Japanese art, and they were interested in cutting off compositions. He's using all those techniques. Notice he can create wonderful, wonderful compositions with very limited color palettes. And as I have already pointed out to you before, his crisp use of line is just really still astounding to people in the art world. Well, guess who's up there? I see somebody with black gloves. This has to be Yvette Galbert. She is singing. And who's over here? This is one that he treated kindly with his brush all the time. Her name is Jane Avril, and I will show you some examples of the work that he did of her. This is a piece that he did that shows somebody out there on the dance floor. I can't tell you who that is, but Lautrec saw this and just couldn't get over it. He had to do this sketch. And here she is, she's eyeing up this man, and this woman is trying to get him out of there, I'm sure, so that he doesn't get involved with her, and everything, the whole evening, turns into a disaster for everybody. Here's Jane Arville. Jane Arville was double jointed too, but she, not to the extent of Valentine the Boneless, but Jane Arville could bring her leg way up high, and she had a quivering about her. She had grown up in a home where the mother was she was addicted to drugs, and she was also an alcoholic, and she was a prostitute, and she would, in bad times, she would beat her daughter, to the point that at one time Jane ended up in an asylum for some time just to try to get her head on straight again. But Jane Arville will dance at one of the top concert halls, which is the Jardin de Paris on the Champs-Élysées. She will eventually replace the glutton at the Moulin Rouge. Her style of performance is very different from the others that I have pointed out to you. Here's one of her publicity photographs. And then look what Lautrec does. This is the same dress. See the snake design? And you see it here? He gives her length, he gives her grace, he adores her. And she was always so, so kind to him. She will live until 1943. When she danced, she quivered a lot. And one of the reasons for that, and this is her leaving the dance hall. You see how she covered up? She did not want to be who she was on stage. When she went on stage, she was somebody completely different. And she moved her arms and she jerked around a lot, and she had a very soft voice and a soft way of singing. And so when she was dancing, she was one person. And when she was not dancing and not on the stage, she was somebody completely different. But she was always sweet and kind to him. Her life does not end up to be all that she had hoped. There were many, many men who wanted to marry her. And she turned all of them down until she probably picked the worst one she could have picked. He was an artist. He was fairly successful, not a well-known name, but successful at the time, and they had a home outside of Paris. The first year of marriage went okay, and then after that he started leaving for long periods of time, and one thing led to another, and he dissipated into disastrous death, and she ends up penniless. She has spent all of her money trying to sustain this property that they have, and she dies in a senior center in Paris at the age of 75. She had a wonderful early career and a sad situation towards the end of her life. This is another picture of the Moulin Rouge, and I include this one because it's one you probably have seen before, but I wonder if you have noticed this. See who's there? That's Lautrec. He's walking with Valentine the Boneless. And over here is the dancer fixing her top knot, getting ready to go out on the dance floor. There's something else about this piece that I think is really just beautifully done. It's in one area. Look at this face, and look at the way that he's used the blue to come down across her forehead and the bridge of her nose. It's absolutely a lovely piece. I've seen this part of this painting reproduced all by itself. He spent a lot of time at brothels. Cafes and brothels. This is a woman, and this is the same subject. He has redone it, and this one is so light, but I wanted you to at least see the same situation, that she's unfastening her corset while her client is sitting there waiting for her. Prostitution was big in Paris at the time, and it will be a center for his art production, but not in a negative way. There were times in his life when, instead of living in his apartment, because he could always afford to be wherever he wanted to be, he lived in brothels. And he would sometimes move in for a week or two. And then he would just take his sketch pad, and during the day he would just go around from one room to the other. And if somebody was having an affair in one of the rooms, why, he might do some sketching. They just kind of treated him like a little pet. So it was okay with them as long as and he ate with them. They had a nice dining room there. He did over 50 paintings and lithographs of these kinds of subjects. But what he does, he doesn't show the seedy side of their lives. He shows the isolation. He shows the loneliness. I think he was showing through them some of what he felt in his own life. If these women are forced into this work as a way to survive, he is forced into his lifestyle because he really has no choice. Fates have not been so good to him. He would not exhibit any of his brothel pictures during his lifetime. These only came to light after he died, with one exception. He does have a man who worked with him on his cookbook, and Maurice is the man's name. Maurice will have an art studio, and Maurice will have an art show of Toulouse-Lautrec's work. And in the back room, where only the very, very closest friends of Toulouse-Lautrec could go, they could see some of these pictures, but they were never brought to the public eye. This is a series again. Look at these. Now she is either finished with the customer or something, but she is about ready to take a bath because there's the tub back there. And the style then was for them to wear these big high boots, so she still has those on. They were inspected on a regular basis, and he really found that to be just a really vulgar experience for them and anybody who happened to be watching, so that they didn't have crabs or whatever else people get who spend time with a number of different people, but they would have to walk around with their clothing up around their waists or their shoulders and pass by the doctor. Here you go, there are the boots again. Notice something else. Look here, this lovely woman who just looks like she's getting ready to go to bed. There's a customer coming. There's this hat right back there on the counter. Here he is in his studio with one of his models who is wearing nothing. And it's really not a cheesecake shot. It's really not that much of a turn on at all. But they're both looking at this piece that he's done of a scene in the salon. Now the salon was called the White Flower. But the salon, this salon was the Tony high-end salon in Beaumont. So if you could afford to go there for your services, you were somebody who had some money in your pockets. And this is the actual painting that they were looking at. And one of the things about the White Flower was that it had red sofas everywhere. And you see those around here. There's another painting that he did, and she's putting on or taking off her boots. Now, a closer look at this piece for a minute. He had a favorite. Her name was Muriel, and there she is. And she's, of course, waiting for a customer, but she also was a favorite to serve Toulouse-Lautrec. Notice something else. Back here, you see women sitting together? They usually sat in pairs. She's sitting by herself. This, folks, is the madam. The madam sits there, commands the room to make sure that her girls all do what they're supposed to. And this one is about to be inspected. She's pulled her slip up. This was a friend of his. Aristide was a singer. He was a composer. He's the one that composes the kind of risque songs that were sung by Yvette Gilbert. And when he composed these, he loved to do that and then go to a cabaret, and he owned one himself. But he would go to a cabaret where she was singing. He just loved to do that because he was listening to his music and he was watching the reaction of the people. It was just a fun time for him. But he always wore a red scarf. That was his signature. Now, far be it from me to not take advantage of an opportunity to do something for fun. And I won't leave this on the screen for very long, but do take a look at this. There I am, sticking my head out of one of those boards that somebody has painted in Albee that has his picture minus his face so that mine could come through. I think his is a better match for what was going on there. But just because, you know, it's there, sometimes you just have to do it. Here he is. There he is, 5'8", or 4'8" rather, and there is his friend, and they're looking at another poster that he has done. When he was in Albee, because he still had family there, even though he went back and forth to Paris, he had family in Albee and he would go back. This was his favorite haunt. And so when I was going into Albee, the guide said that this restaurant, Le Ponte, was his favorite hangout. So I automatically dropped my bags at the hotel and quickly sped up the street and took a seat right back in here, and I had a glass of wine with the ghost of Toulouse-Lautrec. It was a wonderful afternoon. Now, I told you I'd mention something about the cane, and if you remember the pictures I showed you, this is one of them, where he is walking with the cane. He became a severe alcoholic over time, and he was always afraid that he wouldn't have another drink right at his elbow. And so he had a series of his canes hollowed out. So this cane that he's holding right here, or that you can see in this drawing, this cane, even though it's long and thin, it tapers out and it would have a screwed off top on it. So he could sneak around a corner, tip the cane upside down, and drink the alcohol that was in it to get his fix and go back out, and when nobody was looking, he'd fill the cane up again. So some of his habits were really helped lead to the disasters that his life ended up with. This is a book that I showed you before. This is the painting on the front of the book. It's called The Art of Cuisine. This is not the painting, this is a poster that was done for his friend Victor. But it's this same image that's on the front of the book. It's called The Art of Cuisine, and it was not written for novices. Lautrec said that he wasn't going to put he was going to take time to put all the measurements, a quarter teaspoon of this and a half a teaspoon of that and a cup of this. If you didn't know how to cook, you did not deserve one of his books. His book was not for a novice, but he considered himself to be, and all reports say he was, an outstanding chef, because he said cooking was also very much an art. So if you are somebody who enjoys cooking, take a look at what you're doing. It's considered to be an art form. And he said that one of the worst things he could do to a person was not invite them to dinner, because that was the biggest insult. He made this one dish called dove ring with olives, and that was his favorite dish. And evidently it took a great deal of preparation. And his insult to people would be, they just don't deserve my dove ring with olives. And that was about as bad a comment he could make about a person. When he invited you to dinner, you could count on it being in his studio, which he would have cleaned up. He would have a table decorated, he would have a menu, and everything was theme-based. He would have hand-printed the invitations. It was an affair not to be missed, and he invented the cocktail. The cocktail that he invented was called the earthquake. And get this, a wine glass half full of cognac and half full of absinthe. Absinthe is lethal. It's outlawed in Europe. I was in France and I was able to get a little, you can buy absinthe in France, but it comes in bottles about the size of perfume. They really don't want you to drink very much of the absinthe. And absinthe will be one of Vincent van Gogh's drinks of choice. But Lautrec, while he was preparing his meal, would serve cocktails, and often he would serve them an earthquake. This is his dear longtime friend. Maurice had gone to school with him when they were small. He was a gallery owner. He is the one who owned the gallery that Vincent van Gogh's brother Theo had owned before he died. Now, he also was a person who organized Lautrec's show. Remember the paintings that he put in the back room just for special guests? And he was a foodie. So he would travel around with Lautrec from one place to another, and they would try out different recipes, and they would figure out what they could add or take from, or what they could do to make it their own, and something that Henri would want to make in his own kitchen. And after Henri Toulouse-Lautrec dies, Maurice will establish the Elbe Museum. I'll show you a picture of that more in just a few slides here. But he is a dedicated friend to Lautrec all the time. Here they are sitting on a park bench. Lautrec was kind of wild and crazy and did all kinds of things, as you are well aware now. And he was a stabilizing influence. He was always there as a friend, as a protector, as somebody who would be there to help him out. He was very different from his little friend, but he cared for him to the very, very end. Sometimes they would go hunting along the coast of Brittany, and they would hunt for quail, they would hunt for duck, and whatever they shot, they would certainly bring back, and Lautrec would make some interesting meal from it. But he does this sketch of Maurice on the deck of a boat, and get this, Maurice really was a friend. For this to be done, he posed 75 or 65 times. There is a sketch of Lautrec in his kitchen working. It looks like he's brewing up some kind of concoction there. There's one of his menus. This menu is also in the book that I just showed you, as are some of these same sketches. Whenever you arrived, you got your menu, and there were sketches on it. Or it was a folded sheet of paper and it had a cover design, and then this would have been inside. There are just a few examples of those. Lautrec never went anywhere without a little nutmeg and his grinder. He carried those in his pocket. Why? He might want some port, and if he wanted port, he had to have some fresh nutmeg sprinkled on the top of it. So if you like port and you haven't tried this, it might be the new thing for you to do this afternoon when you have a cocktail. I would certainly suggest maybe the port after dinner rather than the absinthe before, but then who am I to tell you what to do? Anyway, this is an important year, 1899. He suffered a severe mental breakdown, and he goes to an asylum that's outside of Paris. It's just west of Paris, and it is very upscale. His parents, his father has long ago just let him go. He doesn't pay any attention to him at all. And his mother, living in Paris, has been trying to support him as best she could. And finally, by 1899, she just decides she can't do it anymore. She has to go back to Elbe. She has to go back to the Bordeaux area. She has to get away. It's just too much for her. And so she leaves. And it really devastated him because she was his port in the storm. She was the one, along with Maurice, but she was the one who was always there for him. And now she was gone. And so he suffers a severe mental breakdown. And he is in the asylum for 3 months until they deem that he is well enough that he can leave. However, he will stay on for 3 more months because he's busy doing pictures. He does all of these 40 horse and circus pictures before he's discharged. And the asylum has no circus, it has no riding ring. He does these all from memory. an incredibly, incredibly capable person when he put his mind to it. And the doctors agree, and they say, you know, whenever you want to go, you can. Nobody who draws and paints like this can be insane. They wouldn't give him paint, though. They would only give him pencils and crayons and charcoal. And you can see here crayon work behind this piece, and the pencil work and the crayon touch-ups in there. Early in 1901, he's hospitalized again. After he leaves the hospital in 1899, he travels around some. He's in Paris and he's out of Paris, but he's drinking a great deal. And finally, he gets DTs. So in 1901, he is hospitalized for 3 months. He was just really shaking. He was an earthquake at that point. So once he is out of the hospital, he has to go someplace where he can still continue his recovery, and he goes to his mother's chateau. But it was at this point that he realized, and I think his mother did too, that his wild lifestyle had pretty much caught up with him. This will be the museum that after he dies, because he has an incredible collection of his own work. This will be called the Lautrec Museum. I've been there in Burby Palace in Albi. This is the palace, and I have to say, if you go, please take a guide. You wander around through a warren of rooms like you cannot begin to imagine. But the paintings that are in there are all originals, and they are his. And he and, Maurice and Lautrec's mother are the two that plead with the Albi Council for access to use of this palace, because it is empty by that time, to use as a museum for him. And thank goodness they went ahead and did it, because it's an absolutely wonderful place. Look at this piece. This is him twice. He's set up the camera. He's taken this picture. He's moved the stool over. He's gotten rid of this. And he just has himself sitting here on the stool again. And he took the picture over again, so he has a double exposure. I just think it's kind of a fun piece for you to have seen. Back here, I don't know if you've noticed while I've been talking, but the salon picture of the white flower, there are two that he did of that painting that you only saw one of. This is what he leaves. Look at this. Look at the numbers. Look at the numbers of the drawings and the oils and the watercolors and the prints and the posters. Extremely prolific. He was a very busy person for the last 10 years of his life. And as I said to you earlier, he had an unbelievable ability to capture likenesses of individuals in crowds. Artists still remark about that. This is where he breathes his last breath. The Chateau Meldrum. This is where his mother is living. He is 36. He never was anything except with Yvette once in a while, but kind, giving, and gentle. And he dies on September the 9th in 1901. His father knows that he's been sick, of course, and his parents have not divorced. Of course, that would divide up the family estates. So they're still married, and the mother lets the father know that he's in bad shape, and the father shows up. And this is what he does. His very last words that he uttered on earth were, he looked at his father and he said, "You fool, I knew you would not miss the dying." And he died. There's his grave. There's a sketch that he did of himself, and it's on the faceplate of the grave. So if you go there, you can be sure that you're looking at the right grave when you look there. He's considered to be a post-impressionist. He is the one who invented poster art. And of course, I'm sure you won't forget that he invented the earthquake. And when you think of artists, post-impressionist artists, and I have lectured on all of these men in the past, Cézanne, Gauguin, and Van Gogh. He ranks right with them. He is in lockstep with them, with what he was able to contribute through his own efforts and through the support that he got from other artists. He is considered to be one of the finest artists that the world has ever known. And certainly we are thankful for his posters. Here's another final picture of him. And then, this is what's going to happen next week. I'm going to be moving to a group of Italian artists, only 3, but I'm going to be talking about Italian artists because Titian turns out to be one of the men that the Impressionist artists traveled to Italy to study. Well, if they're going there to study him, why? So I'm going to explain all of that when I talk about him next week. He is called the sun amidst small stars because at his time in history, Titian was considered to be the art giant in the area of Venice, which is where he lived and where he worked most of the time. Now, if you want any of the recipes, there are 2 sheets of those. Please entertain yourself by clicking and asking for them. If you have questions or comments, as some of you do during the course of the week, please don't hesitate to be in touch with me or ask presenter. And if you want an advanced PDF copy of the handout on Titian, there are 3 examples of his work there for you to look at, and also some background on him as well, which I think you should enjoy. Now, if you have any questions, there are no questions. Okay, that's great. Well, no questions. That means that I evidently either did a great job or I really confused you. But one way or the other, have a good week, and I'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you.